بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم. Today's talk is on the downfall or decline and then downfall of the Ottoman Empire or the Khilafah of the Uthmanis. Briefly, the Uthmani Khilafah lasted for 600 years. Like the predecessors of the other Khilafahs, it has achieved great things. And it fell into just like the Sunnah of Allah, the tradition that people, states, whatever it is, they go through childhood and then they grow into full strength and then aging again. The Khilafah started from the time of Abu Bakr, from the death of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And we have continuous Muslim Khilafah from that time till 1924. And we have been through all of them, haven't we? The Khilafah of Abu Bakr, the Khulafa al-Rashidin, then the Umayyad Khalifas, then the Abbasi Khalifas, and then the Ayyubis, Salahuddin Ayyub and Salahuddin Ayyubi, and then his children and his nephews, and then the Mamluks took over. And then after the Mamluks came the Uthmanis. So it was continued. There was always a Khalifa. Right? It wasn't as good as the Khulafa Rashidin because nothing would be like that. As the Prophet ﷺ said, after Allah takes out the prophethood, he will send Khilafah on the same methodology as prophethood. It will last as long as Allah wishes to last, and then it will be lifted. So we will not get like this anything, probably till the day of judgment or just before that. The Mahdi will come for a short time of similar standard, really. Right, but never the same. Anyway, amongst their greatest achievements were the conquest of Constantinople, and they called it Istanbul. They called it actually Islambul. Then the secularists changed it to Istanbul. Istanbul means the city of Islam. Then they changed it a little bit so it doesn't have nothing to do with Islam. They called it Istanbul after 1924. So the conquest of Constantinople, that was so important because it ended 1,500 years of Roman Empire ruling, right? And put an end to the Christian Empire once and for all, which gave Muslims a lot of trouble. Doesn't mean that trouble will less after that, but at least one big enemy in the history has been removed. Spread Islam into many areas. Millions of people in Eastern Europe, southern of Russia became Muslims. It protected the Muslims, especially the Muslim Sunnis, from Morocco to Iraq. They've tried actually with Iran. They've lost Iran to the Safavis. So they protected them, especially from Christian attack, a new type of crusades that came into this, the shape of colonialism. They defended Arabia, the coast of Arabia, all along Mecca, Medina, Jeddah, Oman, Yemen, from the Portuguese when they were very powerful. They protected North Africa from the Spanish, Portuguese, and French and Italian for 200-300 years. God knows what would have happened if they were not there. They protected Mecca and Medina for a long time. So they had really achieved a lot for Islam. And as I keep mentioning, they were the only empire in the history of mankind that had 10 great successive leaders. Started with Uthman and ended up with Suleiman the Magnificent. In the West, they call him. The Muslims, they call him Al-Qanuni, the man, the lawmaker. Al-Qanuni means the canonical man, right? After him, the decline started. Why it started? It started because the people who came after, the leaders, were not as good. They came to a very huge empire, the strongest in the world, the most advanced technically, scientifically, architecture-wise, building, construction, The first 200 years, they're the best in the world, really. But then, so they came and they found a lavish life. They enjoyed their life. They were not as clever and they were not as pious. That's the important thing, as the predecessors. So because the empire was very big and powerful, it lasted 300 years after, from 1566. That's when Suleiman Qanuni died. Another 300 years. And during those 300 years, it was shrinking. Right, the areas around it were getting less and less, and the Serbs got independence. So the Bulgarians, the Romanians, they had few wars with the Russians. They were winning at the beginning, but then they start losing badly to the Russians. Plus, economically, they were not doing well as well. Why? Because while Europe was developing, they still dependent on agricultural products only. So they had to import now all the technical matters from the West at high price, like the railways, like building materials, weapons, even weapons. So now, and with the agricultural products usually very cheap compared to industrial ones. So they start going into huge debts. Again, those leaders were not farsighted. They did not take much care of education. There was 1 or 2 universities here and there. Most of the people were illiterate. In Istanbul, there were quite a few schools, but not enough schools. 1 or 2 colleges, 1 or 2 universities. So they lacked a lot behind of this, right? And during all that time, the Western people were not only getting stronger, they were avenging them as well, their losses, the bad losses that they had, the horrendous losses that they had against the Ottomans, by plotting against them and taking part of their land. They never stopped that. In addition to that, they have made 2 major mistakes, really. And that is, we'll talk about those later, inshallah, but I'll mention them. One of them was declaring war on Russia in the year 1878, which they were not ready for it. And the other one was taking the wrong side in the First World War. Now, from the beginning of the 18th century or 19th century, 1800, they felt that the gap between them and the West is increasing in technology, in wealth, in power. So someone like Khalifa called Abdul Majid al-Awwal, who was a Khalifa around 1840s, decided to catch up. So he sent hundreds of young men to Europe to learn, like what they do now, most third world countries, they send their children to Europe for degrees, further studies, hope that those people will come back and make a difference to the country. But there was a very high price to pay. Those who went there, instead of learning technology and science, they have learned liberalism and secularism. They fell into the pleasures of the West, and they were not prepared ideologically. So again, they were so impressed that they were taken in by the Western civilization. When they came back, they became a major part in wrecking the whole empire. Those people, really. So I said, it wasn't well planned. And it wasn't even after that taken care of. When they must have noticed this, but anyway, they didn't do anything about it. So those hundreds, they came back and they started now became really enemies of Islam. they started blaming Islam for the backwardness and the corruption. Instead of blaming themselves, the leaders, the establishment, they blamed Islam. And if they were a bit clever or somebody argued with them, but when your leaders were good Muslims, you were the best in the world. It happened the same throughout Islam. When the Muslim leaders were good, the Muslim empire was very good. And when the Muslim leaders were bad, then we had bad examples. In addition to their achievement, I forgot to say something, that they really have protected Muslim Sunnis from Shia influence. I mean, they stopped Iran, Shiism at Iran, but without them, Iran, the Shia of Iran took over Iraq, Kurdistan, and parts of Turkey. And if they were not checked really, they would have just took over probably all of Turkey and then moved on to Egypt. And then we know that they took Egypt for 200 years, the Fatimids before. That's one of their achievements. Now, those people who came back, they had and became liberals, they had hidden allies. The Ottoman Empire consisted of many ethnic groups. All right, most of the people in Turkey were Turkish, but they had a lot of people who moved in, and they became ethnic, large minorities. Not too large, but very influential. The first of those ethnic minorities were the Jews. The Ottomans felt sorry for them because of the Inquisition in Spain. So what they did, they brought them to Turkey to save them from the Inquisition, because the Inquisition was very bad for the Jews and the Muslims. See, the Zionists were not strong enough that time, so everybody was persecuting the Jews. So they brought a lot of Jews to the state. The Jews, okay, were quiet for a few years, for 1 or 2 generations, and then they started now plotting. They were Armenians, who've always been the worst enemies of Islam amongst the Muslims. The Armenians themselves had wars with the Russia and lost wars with the Russia, so a lot of them became refugees in the Ottoman next empire to them, or the Ottoman Empire. So they moved to Turkey. And then those people, now when they became majorities in villages, they never were majorities in a province. We cannot say this is an Armenian province, but in villages, they were large minorities. They started causing problems with the Sunnis, with the Muslims. And when, they've done this all the time, those Christians always stood by the side of the Christians in Europe, although they have slightly different religion, by the way. The Armenians, they've got they're mostly Catholic, and the countries next to Turkey were Orthodox, like Istanbul before Constantine. Anyway, but among themselves, they were enemies, but when it comes to Muslims, they always united. So the Christians, the Jews, the Muslims who became liberal and secularist, all of them united to demolish the Khilafah, really. They had one aim. So the first thing is they established groups, and those groups start growing, and then they've established a party called Young Turks Party. And the party became popular because they were the educated ones. So at that time, they just installed a great leader of them, one of the last great leader of the Ottomans, called Abdul Hamid II. That is 1857. He became, and he noticed that those people are very powerful. So what he did, he established a parliament. And because they were the educated ones, they won most of the seats. The first decision they took, those guys, when they became the majority in the parliament, the first decision they took was to fight Russia. And Abdul Hamid II was good, pious, great man. I mean, one of the, not like Khulafa Rashidin, but he was one of the great Ottomani leaders. He warned them, we're not ready for war. Insisted democracy means democracy, they entered the war and they lost badly, and they lost a lot of land in north of Turkey, the land between them and Russia. So he knew that they were useless. He closed the party for the next 30 years, closed it down. So he did not see, again, similar weaknesses like Muhammad Mursi. Send them home, these terrorists, because they started now damaging the society. Instead of imprisoning them or take them to court, they caused the country to be in debt for billions of whatever. They used to use golden coins at the time. I don't know what is it worth. The country was indebted badly. They lost badly the war. They lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers. So they start now spreading news, bad news, and enlisting people, especially army officers. Enlisted so many army officers, and slowly besieging the Khalifa. Now, this Khalifa was, as I said, he was a great man, was a pious man. So he did his best, really, to improve the country. He started manufacturing weapons again. He was not oppressor. He did open many schools, universities, but again, he was lonely. He did not have a good team with him, right? He tried to improve his relationship with the Muslim world. I mean, he tried really for 30 years to revive the empire, which was dying, really. And they used to call it the sick man of Europe. In addition to all these problems, by that time, the Freemasons became strong in the Western world. The Freemasons start working now in Turkey, or the Ottoman Empire, on both sides, where there is the Turkish people as well as other people like the Arabs or the Europeans. And the Freemasons were controlled by the Jews all the time, before and now. So now so many forces aiming at ending the Khilafah without mentioning that our aim is the Khilafah. Our aim was anything Islamic, they are against it. So they kept working on this, and in a very ugly way as well. They decided, those people, that to end the Khilafah is not only to remove the Khalifa, will be the last step to do, but to weaken the country and get rid of all its connections with Islam. So they started causing problems with the Muslims, non-Turkish Muslims. So they had one of their men called Jamal Pasha. He was a governor in Iraq, a Turkish governor. He did a lot of atrocities there, hanged many people. People hated him and hated the Turkish because of it. Then he moved to Syria. And in Syria, again, he did the same. Everybody hated him. He was just hanging just like Sisi now. Tens of thousands of people in prisons, and thousands were hanged for no reasons really, accusations, right? So this is one of their plots as well. And then there's the control of the army. So when the First World War came, right, they had a major part in the defeat of the empire. We'll come to this a little bit in a few minutes' time. But let's see now what they did. They became so powerful that they now wanted to challenge the Khalifa. Another important event happened before that. In 1892-93, the Zionist movement met somewhere in Basel, in Switzerland, and they decided to establish a national homeland for the Jews. And they really had few plans, few alternatives. They didn't say want to go to the father's land in Palestine. It's been ours for 4,000 years, as they always lie. They thought about the Greenland, Uganda, and Palestine. So they said, we'll try Palestine. So they met this Abdul Hamid II. This Herzl he was a very rich man, powerful man in Europe, not long before the Nazis came. So he met Abdul Hamid II, and he said to him, look, will you allow free immigration of Jews to Palestine. He said, well, if I allow this, they'll become majority, they'll take over. I can't do that. He said, look, we'll pay off all your debts. We'll give you so much money. He said, look, I cannot sell it. It's not for sale. This is paid by Muslim blood. I cannot sell it. I cannot betray Islam. So this is not for sale. Get out. Kicked him out. That man, okay, as I said, he was powerful in the West, and because of the banking system, the Rothschild were in charge of the banks in the West, and they were Jews as well. So again, one more force to fight now. The secularists, the Freemasons, the Jews, the Christians. I have to mention another force. Too many, I'm telling you, it wasn't one or two factors. A lot of the Jews who converted to Islam, but then we found out later on that they were not Islam, who lived in Eastern Europe, not in Turkey itself, but it was all Turkey, right? So west of Turkey now, north of Greece, near Albania now, called the Jews of the Donma. The Jews of the Donma. Donma is the area. So those Jews who called themselves Muslims, they were freely entering into the mosques, into the army, etc., and causing havoc by always criticizing the Khalifa. Islam again became part of the plot, part of the organizations. The Jews felt so powerful in Turkey that through the other guys there, the Young Turks, which changed its name to the Union of the Party of Development and Democracy, something like this. They changed the name, but they were still the same because people didn't like them a lot because they lost the war with Russia. So they changed the name, but they were still the same people. They had so many army officers on their side that they took over Istanbul. And Abdul Hamid Thani was really hesitant to confront them or not. He made a mistake. He did not confront them because the army that with him was in Ankara was prepared to fight them. He didn't. SubhanAllah, it's very similar to Muhammad Mursi's situation. He didn't fight them. There were enough forces to go to the palace and ask a rabbi, a Jewish rabbi, country of 200-300 million Muslims there, a Jewish rabbi. He went to the Khalifa and said to him, sir, you have to abandon your position or we'll expel you. He said, but you are a Jew. What are you doing here? You are in a company of another Jew, another Christian, and one so-called Muslim. There were four, 2 Jews, a Christian, right? This is how these minorities became so powerful. So they forced him to abdicate, and he did. He left, poor guy, and they put in one of his cousins, but from now on, it was only figurehead doing nothing, really. 2 Khalifas after him, and then they took them all. So they got rid of him, and soon after that, that was in 1908, soon after that, those guys decided to enter the war and entered what? On the side of the Germans. The Germans, the Austrians, they took on the whole of Europe. Abdul Hamid al-Thani, among the things he did, really, I have to mention them. We'll go through it, inshallah, with some slides later on. In his time, he had a very good relationship with the Germans. The Germans were very sympathetic with them, really. They never plotted against them. And they felt that having a powerful ally like the Turkish, it will be good for them if they ever fight the French and the British. Things were coming because of the conflict of political and economic interest in those 2 countries, France and Britain, they had, by that time, they had many colonies, but Germany now started, woke up and they wanted to have their own share of the third world. But still, they were too weak to confront all these countries, including Russia as well. So they took the decision and they decided to, those people who took over, they decided to, join the war alongside the German. So they started the war. Surprisingly, wherever the Turkish fought, they were winning, although they were less equipped or worse equipped, not less, worse equipped than the Europeans, but they were winning. At that time, one of the bad factors as well, that we had Arab nationalists again opened another front on the Ottoman Khilafah. Some say because of the corruption of the Khalifas, some say because of the oppression, etc. We have the Hashemites in Mecca and Medina, the Sheriff of Mecca. He formed an alliance with the British to fight the Uthmani, who was in charge of Jordan, Mecca, Medina, Syria, and Iraq. And they promised him, we'll make you king of all those areas. At the same time, the British promised the Saudis, the Wahhabi movement in Eastern Saudi Arabia, in Eastern Arabia, it wasn't called Saudi Arabia, right? If you help us against the Turkish, you take our side, we will give you all of Arabia. At the same time, they said to the Jews, if you finance us, we'll give you Palestine. At the same time, that's all the British promises. At the same time, they said to the French, once the war is finished, we'll give you half of Arabia. Right? And the Jews will give you Palestine. So that fool, the Sheriff of Mecca, declared war on the Uthmanis and took a few thousand Bedouins, and probably know the story of Lawrence of Arabia. It was Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence was Arthur Lawrence's name, an intelligence officer from Britain. He came and he convinced him, let's fight together. Britain will make you the king of Arabia. So he agreed. They brought a lot of money. They bought some Bedouins. They didn't buy off all the Arabs, because when the war started, that was 1916. When the war started in 1914, because many people think the Arabs were the cause of the, some Arabs were one of the causes really of the downfall of the Ottoman Empire. In Arabia itself, the Arabian Peninsula, northern of Arabia, northeast towards Kuwait and Iraq, they were the Rashid family or tribes, very big tribes. So once Turkey started the war, they sent tens of thousands of men as volunteers. Aleppo itself sent some 2 divisions, some 10, 15,000 men. Iraq, after that, Jamal Pasha left, again, they become pro-Turkey again. They sent thousands. So in Turkey alone, there were more than 100, 150,000 Arabs fighting for the Turkish, and most of them are volunteers. Very few from Syria, only from Syria, they wouldn't go from Damascus because of the history of Jamal Pasha, who did a lot of atrocities. Right. Again, the southern Arabia, where the Hashemites were, etc., again, they were fighting them. So when those, the Hashemites and the British forces moved towards Jordan and Palestine, at that time there were almost 100,000 Turkish soldiers. Most of them were Arabs, most of them. Most of those people were Arabs, really, but led by Turkish. What the secularists did back in Istanbul, they made sure that the armies, the Turkish armies outside Turkey who were fighting, they did not get supplies or logistics of food and weapons. So there was a lot of Turkish there, great fighters, and the Arabs good fighters as well. Everybody is good in good mood. All the Muslims are good when they are in good mood, when they have Iman. But they found themselves without ammunitions, without food, and soon surrendered. They couldn't fight really, right? There was as well thousands protecting Mecca and Medina. And the poor guys, a lot of them were killed and they couldn't fight, they did not have weapons. Why? That is not the work of the Arabs or the ordinary Turkish people. That was the work of the secularists in Turkey who wanted to get rid of all non-Turkish because they were nationalist and they were anti-Islamic. The same happened in the Western Front. Again, these people made sure that the army lost. So all those factors now led to the country losing the war badly. And after they've lost the war, there were conditions that they had to sign. We'll come back to this soon, inshallah. It's called, they have to sign the Lausanne Agreement or treaty, which limited the area of Turkey as only where Turkey is now. But all other areas, they had to give them up. And the other areas that they gave them up, they didn't give them freedom. Like when this Sharif Hussein found out that he was misled by the British and they tricked him, where's the kingdom you're going to give me? They said, there is no kingdom for you. Sorry, you got to stay at home. So he openly started disagreeing with them and saying, I will not sign any agreement with you. So they exiled him to Cyprus, I think, for the rest of his life. But his sons were treacherous, like King Abdullah, not this one, his grandfather, King Faisal, his other son. They made them local kings, but under the control and colonization of Britain in Iraq and in Jordan. They made two kingdoms that belonged to them, to the British. Syria and Lebanon, they gave it to France as agreed again, an agreement called Sykes-Picot between two foreign ministers, the British and the French. They agreed to divide the Arab countries between them. And then again, among them agrees between the West that Libya went to Turkey, and then the French before that they already took, no, Libya went to Italy, sorry, they took them, and before that the French took over Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. Now, with all these sad things happen, there was a man called Kemal Ataturk who led the movement to remove Khilafah and Islam from Turkey altogether. Kemal Ataturk was, people believe, was from the Jews of the Donma who pretend to be Muslims. This man joined the army, pretended to be Muslim, practicing Muslim. In the army, in 1915, the British, that during the war, at the time when the Turkish were winning, because the German, the Muslims were winning at the beginning, they decided to invade Turkey itself. In a battle that we'll go through it now, it is one of the great, all-time great battles, like the battles of the Turkish before. It's called Gallipoli. We'll go through this war here. It's very interesting. And this is the last great Muslim war, probably for the past hundreds of years. Let's share the screen. Okay. Yeah, one thing else. Can you see the screen now? Yeah?
Yes,
We'll make it larger in a minute. One thing else that Abdul Hamid Thani, what he did actually, he built a railway line from Istanbul to Medina and to Iraq as well, and to Palestine. And as soon as the war finished, the Arabs and the British, they destroyed it, right? And since then, we never had anything like this. This is some pictures of the what you call it, the railway line. This building from the Turkish, right? That is in Syria and Damascus. This is the railway station. Can you imagine this more than 120 years ago? I don't know where is this one here. This is the type of training that we had. This is the army that Lawrence of Arabia led. That's a real photo, not a film photo, not from that Lawrence of Arabia's film photos. Right, now we'll talk about, this is the Lawrence of Arabia. This is Gallipoli, the battle that hundreds of thousands of people lost, but we'll talk about this when we come to it. Now, looking at this here, okay, this is, can you see Europe here? You can see this is Istanbul. Now, next one be clearer. This here, peninsula, you know, peninsula is not like an island. It's an island, but it has connection with the mainland, so we call it peninsula. This peninsula, not a town, called Gallipoli, right? So the Allies, the British, the French, New Zealand, and Austria, that had anything between 250 to 400,000 soldiers that they amassed to attack. They go from here. The plan was to go from here straight to Istanbul, right? This is the peninsula, all this area, this large area. And now we'll see what the fleets, right? This is the countries that plan to attack Istanbul. That's France, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. They brought with them 77 ships, warships, 400,000 soldiers. And the warships that they had with them were the best at the time in the world. There was a great power there. Look at some of the names of the ships. You can find them even in Wikipedia. Irresistible, inflexible, another one, undefeatable. And this is the biggest that they had. It's called the Ocean. It was the biggest ship that I think after Bismarck, the German ship, that was the biggest in the world. And all these loaded with a lot of field guns. You know, field guns that Muhammad Fatih used, that was 300 years before, or more, 400 years before. So by that time, a lot of development happened, the weight, the power, the range, right? The British were so assured that they're going to beat the Ottomans, the Turks, and they're going to enter Istanbul, that they started selling tourist journeys before the war started, to Istanbul. Those people were queuing to buy tickets to go to Istanbul. In a few weeks' time, we're going to have a good time in Istanbul once we take over. And we'll see what happened to that. This is here again where they were attacking. This is Gallipoli, the peninsula. You remember when Muhammad Fatih tried to enter, not here, that was in the north near Istanbul. This is about 100 miles away from Istanbul. The Byzantine, they put chains, you remember, so the ships cannot go through. Things have changed. What they did, the Turkish, what they did, they put now sea mines, naval mines. This is all filled with mines, right? Lines and lines of mines. These here, the crosses, the X's, etc. These are the type of weapons that they had prepared to defend their country. And right here, I just explained what's the type of guns. There's the field gun artillery, and there's the howitzer, and there's the mortar. And it all depends on the range and the accuracy you want to fire and the size of it. So they were well prepared, the Turkish, I must admit, for that. They were waiting for them, but 77 ships had a lot of firepower. They killed thousands of Turkish, really. Thousands and thousands of Turkish, 77 ships, each ship, and we're talking about 400,000 soldiers. You will see that the ships were really loaded with people. Thousands of Turkish died. Most of their defenses were destroyed, and it looks like the war is lost. In one of the positions, Turkish positions, one man who was unconscious because of the bombing, but he wasn't injured. He woke up, and his name is Saeed Chabuk. He just got up and he said, "Anybody around?" An injured soldier said to him, "Yes." He said, "Where's the rest of us?" He said, "Killed." He got up, this guy, and walked around. Next to him, he found a field gun which was intact. this type of field gun, right? He found intact, nothing wrong with it, and still working order. He can see that the British ships, that ocean, the biggest ship, was within his range. But the problem is he had to carry 250 kilogram bombshell to load it to that gun. And that's impossible to be done by one man. What the Turkish had for that, they had a system, simple system, but effective, that it had a mechanized movement on rails, small rails that will take it to the gun. And next to the gun, there is a mechanical lift that will lift it up and they feed it to the gun. This guy, he tried by himself. Somehow he carried it on his back. It's like a miracle. This man, he carried it and fed it to the gun. And with Allahu Akbar, he fired it at that ship. I mean, this is a miracle. We'll see how it happened after. So, right? So he fired it. It's called Sa'id Chabuk. He fired it and he hit that ocean right in the front part of it, not in the front part. When he hit it in the front part, the people who are in charge of it, they lost control, and they could not control it which way to go. It went straight into the mine field and exploded within minutes. It was the biggest ship was drowned. Now the remaining soldiers who were there were watching. Suddenly, all of them shouting Allahu Akbar. They realized the British have lost the biggest ship. Within hours, the news spread that all this work was the work of one man. These are the other ships that quite a few, in Wikipedia, you'll find that those ships that I mentioned to you, the irresistible, the inflexible, they were all destroyed as well. Right? So when the Allies saw that their forces, the ships were getting destroyed easily, suddenly, out of sudden, they don't know how it's happening. They decided to go for a land attack before they lose everybody. Right? This is a French ship as well that was hit as well. See, I mean, suddenly they were losing. It looks like the end of the war, and subhanAllah, these Turkish had faith in Allah, faith in themselves. So they start this is the French ship. That's not the other ones. And it's all the same, right? So they asked this man, "How did you manage it?" The officer, "How did you carry it?" He said, "Allah help me." They asked him to do it again. He couldn't. The picture I showed you earlier, that he's carrying the gun here, yeah. That is a fake one. They made one for him from wood and they painted it and they took a photo just to register the incident, just for memory. That's a wooden one, very light one. And even he couldn't do it again. He said, Allah did that. I couldn't do it by myself, right? And this man really revived Iman within the army, all those secularist army, etc. Everybody start now, or they made 2 rak'ah of salah, right? And with Allahu Akbar, they charged at this is what happened to the irresistible, all right? The Allies attacked there were hundreds of thousands of them, but the Turkish went to them. This is one of the castles there. This is, look how many these European soldiers, how they were packed. When we say hundreds of thousands, there were 77 ships like this, right? Those army there now, suddenly they start praying because of this man's action. They had faith in Allah again, and they attacked them. And really, those soldiers, officers. This is a picture, not very clear, but while they were praying, right? And the battle, although I mean altogether the battle lasted a few months, but that's the end of it. What I told you, at the end of it, there were 250,000 Uthmanis killed, 300,000 allies were killed, Europeans allies were killed. Out of the 250,000, for people who say that Arabs were anti-Turkish, there were 70,000 Arabs. Their graves are still there in that area with their names and the area they came from. This is not long ago, about 100 years ago, so the records are still there, right? Right, I think that's the end of the show. And then we'll go back now to the man who has done the worst damage, really, and that is Kemal Ataturk. Kemal Ataturk, as I said, he was a young army officer. He joined Gallipoli. He was a commander. He wasn't the overall leader. And although he was secularist, non-Islamic, probably a Jew, God knows what his religion is, but he was really impressed with this Allahu Akbar for 1 minute, second. He was really impressed at how those soldiers who were just about on the verge of defeat, they changed it to a great victory. But he came back to Istanbul now with a lot of praise, a lot of decorations. They attributed the victory to him and people like him, those army officers. Soon he became the leader of the chief of the army of the Turkish army. And he had a plan. Before that, he used to pray in the mosque. His wife was hijabi, her name was Latifa Khanum. He used to be seen with his Latifa Khanum wearing the hijab, etc. And after they made him the chief of the army, the first thing he did, he went to the Khalifa and removed him altogether and declared Turkey is a secular state. We have nothing to do with Islam. His wife left him, really. She was a pious woman. She left him. Then he married another woman, and he was proudly going in the street and banned even hijab in public, banned hijab in schools, in universities. We know the story of Turkey and hijab that lasted till Erdogan came from 1920 till 2002. Not only that, now he started making a new constitution for the country. The constitution is all anti-Islamic. The first evil thing he did as well, I don't know what's the first evil. Everything he did was evil. Whether removing the Khalifa, that was Abdul Majid II. That was 24th of March, 1924. That was the last Khalifa. He was figurehead as well, as I said, him and the one before him, but not the one before them, who was Abdul Hamid al-Thani, the second. So now, again, in his war against Islam, he changed the writing from the Arabic characters to Latin characters. That means the next generation cannot read the Quran, cannot read Turkish science, cannot read Islamic books in Turkish. So he cannot read. So really, he destroyed all 500-600 years of culture. He destroyed it within one generation. Within a few years, nobody could read anything on Islam, on their history, on their heritage, because it was different language. He translated the Azan into Turkish, if he allowed it. I mean, one day he was going from one town to another, and he heard the Azan. He changed his mind, cursed the people. One day the scholars met him to greet him. He nearly killed them. Straight away, open war on Islam, this guy, right? I mean, probably him and the people like him who were not sending the supplies to the Turkish armies. They sold the Turkish archives, all the documents, all the books, all the history. They were selling them 3 pence per kilogram. Romania, I think, or Bulgaria bought 50 tons of them and sold them each document for so much, for millions and millions of pounds, right? But he wanted to get rid of it. 3 pence, just imagine. The work of thousands and thousands of scholars for the 600 years was selling 3 pence a kilo, right? And then he used to make speeches in the mosque. Now he was dancing in public with his new wife. He was drinking in public. And he was the one who signed the Lausanne Treaty. The Lausanne Treaty says that the Turkish had to sign to end the war and end hostilities. And the Lausanne Treaty says there's no more khilafas in Turkey. Secularism is the official way of life and constitution based on secularism in Turkey. And the Khalifa, the last Khalifa, and all his relatives, the Ottoman relatives, have to be expelled outside Turkey, and all civil matters in the constitution to be non-Islamic. And then in 1938, I think that he finished with the constitution, which he says non-Islamic secularist constitution. Soon after that, he died. And he was only about 50 something. He died. I think he had cancer in his liver. That was Kemal Ataturk, and that was Turkey, the end of the Khilafah. I must have missed 1 or 2 points, but that is it for today. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Yeah.
In Europe, they call it the period of Renaissance. And the reason was the priests and all these people took all the books from the libraries and everything to Italy, to France and everything. And so their period in Europe, Renaissance, rebirth, meaning rebirth of knowledge, was derived from Istanbul, all the books and texts that were brought here.
You mean from Constantinople? It was Constantinople. Yes.
Yeah, from Istanbul.
Let's correct this a little bit.
Yeah.
First of all, in Constantinople, there was nothing important, believe me. I'll just tell you now. Because Constantinople, when Muhammad Fatih besieged them, they were thinking, they were debating, the priests and the knowledgeable people, can Shaitan stand on a pin or not? Who was created first, the egg or the chicken? What happened that at that time exactly, that's 1453, 1497, Granada fell. It was the books from there that has been stolen, and that started the science. There's a Turkish scholar in Germany now, right? That scholar, now still alive, he collected 150,000 documents of that Renaissance time, 150,000 documents. He found out all about science, chemistry, physics, maths, social science. All were Muslim work, and they were translated and given, but with given the wrong name of authorship.
Yeah, yes.
Right? And this man is still doing it. He is still collecting and publishing books on how they stole Muslim knowledge, really. So it all came from Muslim Spain. All the Renaissance of Europe came from, because it fell almost at the same time. Because Constantinople itself had nothing. When the Muslims entered, I mean, there was no, they were just from the middle, they were representative of the Middle Ages. I mentioned the hadith this time once before. You remember the Prophet ﷺ said, nations are about to descend on you like people approach their tray food. And the Sahaba said, will we be little at that time, Messenger of Allah? He said, no, there will be plenty of you. But the wahan will creep onto you. They said, what is wahan? He said, because wahan Arabic means the weakness. He says, what is wahan? They asked him, what do you mean by weakness? He said, that you will love the dunya and you will hate the akhirah. Right? And this is what happened now. That the Muslims descend like they descend on food. They come not to fight, just to, when you go to food to eat, the Prophet is always accurate. They just come, as you said, just help themselves really to Muslim land, etc. But it won't last, believe me, we'll come back. Look, in our lifetime, these Bedouins from Afghanistan defeated the Soviet Union, right?
Absolutely.
Few Palestinians in Gaza, they had 3 wars with Israel. Israel hasn't won any of them. They defeated 23 Arab armies, but they couldn't defeat the Gazans, right? So we got signs, good signs coming here and there, inshallah, right?
Inshallah.
I mean, to give Palestine.
Yes.
That was early 1900s, was it? What was the relation then after the Turks?
I told you, the British, before the First World War, they were making parallel treaties with a lot of people, and a lot of these treaties conflicting with each other. So they said to the Hashemites who were in Mecca, the Sharif of Mecca, that's the grandfather of the present king of Jordan, if you help us to find the Turks, we'll make you the king of Arabia. That means Jordan, Palestine, Syria, Iraq, and Arabia, what we call Saudi Arabia. It wasn't called Saudi Arabia. So we'll give you that. They said to the Saudis, if you help us, we'll give you all of Arabia. We'll make it Saudi Arabia. They said to the Jews at the same time, they made a declaration in the parliament, that is Balfour, Mr. Balfour was the 1917. He was the foreign minister of Great Britain. He said in the parliament that Her Majesty's government will give Palestine as a homeland for the Jews. So when the Arab leaders heard of this, that the Hashemite and the Saudis, they protested, but they shut them up with some money, really, and that's it. But the Arabs, but they knew they were tricked, right? So they kept their promise to the Jews. They kept their promise to they were making another treaty with the French, and that's called Sykes-Picot. That's in 1916, the year before. That if we get rid of the Ottomans, we'll give you Syria and Lebanon, and we'll take the rest of the Arab world, right? So, brother, I mean, that's what happens when you put your hand in the hand of your enemy. They always will stab you in the front and in the back, both ways. That Sykes-Picot, the two ministers, foreign ministers, Sykes was the British and Picot was the French minister. They met, and yes, with the ruler, they made the Arab world all straight. You can see all straight lines. Well done. Yes. In the world, they were just, and these lines sometimes they crossed towns and cities. Didn't care. Not cities, towns and villages. Didn't care. So just cross line, and this is, and not only that. One British foreign minister was sitting down and was drawing in some tissues what the Arab flag should look like. Making all these straight lines again, the Arab flags, you find most Arab flags are similar because this man had limited vision. So he was making them all green, black, white, red, but different combinations. One's the black above, one the black below, one on the right, one on the left. So you could see one man was designing all the Arab flags.
If you look at the countries in Africa, they divided them amongst themselves, the Belgians, the British, the French, and some German. They're straight line graphs.
Yeah,
Look
they're all straight line.
Straight line, rulers.
Yeah,
Yeah.